Back today for affirmative action programs aimed at overcoming discrimination against women and minorities in the workplace. The U.S. Supreme Court today expanded the ability to challenge court-approved affirmative action plans already in place. The Supreme Court itself split sharply 5-4. CBS News law correspondent Rita Braver reports the ruling and its impact.
The Supreme Court today gave white firefighters in Birmingham, Alabama, the right to challenge legal agreements known as consent decrees the city made to overcome years of discrimination by giving hiring and promotion preference to minorities. The justices said that even though the whites were not involved in the original case, they could sue on grounds of reverse discrimination.
The Supreme Court has agreed that nobody can make an agreement and then shove it down the throats of some third party that didn't consent to that agreement.
Chief Justice William Rehnquist led the court's conservative majority. In a dissent by Justice John Paul Stevens, the court's liberals predicted that the decision will subject employers who seek to remedy past discrimination to a never-ending stream of lawsuits.
It would lead us into 15, 20 years of expensive litigation as we took on each white employee who wanted to sue us for reverse discrimination.
Today's announcement marks the third time in this Supreme Court session that the court has decided against civil rights advocates on a major case. Just last week, in a decision involving cannery workers in Alaska, the court said that the mere fact that minorities are clustered in lower-paying jobs is not itself evidence of discrimination. And earlier this year, the court struck down most broad local government programs that set aside contracts for minority businesses.
I think that if you take the three cases together, they affirm in dramatic fashion the principle of non-discrimination.
In the last 6 months, this court has done more to destroy the area of civil rights litigation than other courts did throughout history.
Civil rights groups say they'll now try to get Congress to pass new laws to override this recent series of decisions. Rita Braver, CBS News, Washington.
The Supreme Court also dealt a setback today to women trying to press a sex discrimination suit against AT&T. The justices ruling that the women waited too long to claim AT&T seniority system changes discriminate against them. Chinese authorities tightened their grip and extended their terror today. State-run media reported hundreds more arrests of pro-freedom students and their supporters all over the country. The communist leaders also heightened their confrontation with the United States over a leading dissident who has taken refuge at the U.S. Embassy in Beijing. John Cheyenne begins our China report.
On state-run Chinese television tonight, an announcer read the arrest warrants for human rights advocates Fang Lijie and his wife Li Shushen, who fled to the U.S. Embassy a week ago. They are charged with counter-revolutionary activities, a crime that can carry the death penalty. There is deep concern about how far communist leaders might go to capture the couple in the embassy. The U.S. is determined to resist any attempt to arrest them.
We Americans stand for certain things, and I don't think we're going to change.
By issuing arrest warrants for Fang and his wife, the Chinese, under their laws, put U.S. diplomats in the position of harboring wanted criminals. From there, most of the options are on the Chinese side.
There have been recent virulent anti-American demonstrations, and diplomats fear that orchestrated protests outside the Beijing embassy are a distinct possibility. Diplomats also worry that soldiers might seal off the embassy, the way London police held the Libyan mission under siege in 1984, demanding the surrender of an embassy employee. Or, like Joseph Cardinal Mincenti, Fang could be a prisoner in the embassy. Mincenti found sanctuary in the U.S. mission in Budapest in 1956 and stayed for 15 years. In the growing war of nerves, U.S. embassy personnel in Beijing have been subjected to abuse on the telephone, allegedly from outraged Chinese citizens demanding the surrender of Fang. Similar telephone harassment has been aimed at the Voice of America for revealing to the Chinese people that peaceful protesters were slaughtered at Tiananmen Square. China's domestic propaganda claims it never happened.
They could close this bureau. They could arrest me. The military's in charge. I guess they can do whatever they want to do.
For the moment, the Chinese government seems to have its hands full, concentrating on a nationwide roundup of alleged counter-revolutionaries. Hundreds of hapless suspects have been paraded on state TV, many of them showing the apparent effects of beatings. Beijing is a city under the military boot, and there is a growing feeling among the targeted Americans that soon the Chinese authorities will turn on them. John Sheehan, CBS News, Beijing.
Standing by in Washington is our State Department correspondent, Bill Plant. Bill, as John Sheehan points out, the Chinese are holding many of the high cards in this. What position does that leave the United States in?
Well, Dan, the United States reaction has been extremely muted since President Bush's news conference last Thursday night. And today, for the first time, the U.S. government spoke out a little bit. It challenged China's big lie technique. The State Department spokesperson, Margaret Tutwiler, said that the whole world saw what happened, saw that students died and that live ammunition was used. And also, for the first time, criticized just a little bit China's leader Deng Xiaoping, said that if he was behind the brutal attack, then he had undercut the very reform process that he had hoped to foster. But there is one subject that is not being discussed here, and that is the subject of the dissident Fang Lizhi, who has taken refuge in the embassy. It's called too sensitive to discuss because U.S. diplomats from the Secretary of State right on down are trying to defuse it. They fear, as John Sheehan pointed out, that it could be a major situation, a dead-end roadblock in U.S.-Chinese relations. It's very frightening, particularly to anyone who remembers what happened at the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. Dan?
Well, Bill, is there any chance that the United States, that President Bush will ask Fang to leave the U.S. Embassy in Beijing?
Dan, I don't think so. The U.S. has virtually no choice but to stand by Fang. That was even guaranteed, as it were, by President Bush the other night. But it is believed by some other diplomats of other nations that the U.S. is quietly trying to arrange some sort of safe passage for Fang out of China under the auspices of a third party. Now, whether or not that will work, we really can't tell because the Chinese have made it very plain that they are dead serious about this as a major, serious roadblock to relations. So the Secretary of State got some other options today, but don't look for new sanctions either, because the official U.S. line is still that it wants to do nothing that would hurt the Chinese people.
Bill Plant at the State Department, thanks. Part of what students and others were protesting in China is the fact that the press, all of it, including television, is in the absolute control of a few people at the top of the Communist Party and government. The party and the government now are using their control of news to the maximum. They are using videotaped news reports from the recent past to identify and incriminate their opponents. They are using news reports of the present to intimidate the population, and they are producing a fictitious version of what happened for the Chinese masses. Correspondent Bob Simon went into the countryside to see how that version is going over.
The gulf between city and countryside is deep and sudden in China. Convulsions in the capital have always seemed far away from these hills, the Swallow Mountains they're called, which look like they were copied off a silk screen. We're not much more than an hour from Beijing right here, commuting distance. We're also in the deepest countryside, a long, long way from Tiananmen Square. Some 80% of the people of China live on the land. These are the people the government is talking to every night on Chinese television. This is, after all, the constituency of what in China has been a peasant revolution. There's been some hoarding, people say. There's been a lot of confusion. The radio says there was an uprising, this farmer says, and then the students left the square. Has he heard any reports that many students were killed? We can't figure out what happened, says his wife. Life goes on here in the midst of political turmoil. The crops won't tolerate strikes or slowdowns. Have you heard anything about what's been going on in Beijing the last couple of weeks? Nope, nothing at all. Don't have time to listen to the radio. Too busy planting. Come to my house, drink something. I've heard stuff, says a junior high school student knowingly. I've heard students were killed. Does he believe it? Who knows what to believe? Has he heard reports that hundreds and hundreds of students were killed in Beijing by the army? Killed? I didn't hear that. We don't go to Beijing anyway. What's it to us? It's the way peasants have perceived events in the Forbidden City for millennia, with whispers and suspicion, far from the farms, not for them to understand. I know everything about what happened in Beijing, says this motorcycle man. Everything. His wife says, let's go. He says, we support the student demand. There's too much corruption. Prices are rising so fast, a horse couldn't catch up. She says, stop worrying about the world's problems. Go to work or go home, but shut up. What I'm telling you is the truth, he says. She says, you're going to get yourself executed. Me? What would they execute me for? Respect for the army runs deep in their village. You can tell by the way people dress their children. 8 days ago, the village loudspeaker blared out that Beijing had been pacified peacefully. Every day, every night, Chinese television broadcast the same message. But some students from this village were in the square. They're back home seeking refuge now. If caught, they'll be charged with what's become a serious crime, knowing the truth.
Were you in the square last weekend yourself?
Yes.
So you know what happened?
Yes.
You told people here what happened?
I told some of them.
Did they believe you?
Yeah, most of them believe me.
The interview was interrupted by the local party boss. He wouldn't talk to us, retreated to his bureau, called the cops. Leave quickly, the student urged.
Are you afraid now?
A little.
The countryside is the battleground for the minds of men, with the power of television massed against the testimony of the very few who were there. Apostles who witnessed the event are spreading the word and waiting for a miracle. Bob Simon, CBS News, in the Swallow Mountains.
Still to come on the CBS Evening News. Barry Peterson on the most popular politician in West Germany. And Terrence Smith on a woman called Robin Hood, who says she stole from the government to give to the poor.
Do you like Raisin Bran?
Yes, I do.
Well, this is new Total Raisin Bran.
Ooh.
It tastes just as good as your Raisin Bran.
Really?
But it has 4 times the vitamin nutrition.
4 times? That's...
So can you think of one single reason why Total Raisin Bran shouldn't be your Raisin Bran?
Well,
Speechless, huh?
Once a little guy went out to see his friends, but Rocky acted funny, and Louis shied away. Maybe it's my breath, he thought. Whew. Then Louis suggested a milk-bone dog biscuit. Good idea. Look, they said, every delicious crunch helps scrape away food particles and plaque that can cause bad breath. And to remember the happy day, Rocky took a picture. The moral, fresh breath, clean teeth, milk-bone twice a day.
This man takes vacations for a living. Don't let him take yours. So don't carry cash. Carry American Express traveler's checks. Don't leave home without them.
Where does it hurt?
Here.
For heartburn and gas, your medical answer is Extra Strength Malox Plus. Its doctor-recommended formula neutralizes more than any leading antacid. Ask your doctor about Extra Strength Malox Plus.
Mikhail and Raisa Gorbachev arrived in Bonn today, the Soviet leader looking to cash in on his enormous popularity in Western Europe and at the same time counter the arms control proposals laid out 2 weeks ago by President Bush. Barry Peterson reports.
They were trading toasts tonight and trading signals as well. Mikhail Gorbachev making it clear he very much likes the troop and weapons cuts proposed by President Bush and NATO.
There is a greater reason to believe now that agreement in Vienna can be reached much sooner than had been expected before.
But Gorbachev flatly rejected the American compromise offer on short-range nuclear missiles. The Americans are willing to talk, but only after agreeing on conventional arms cuts first. Said Gorbachev, let's talk now. West German Chancellor Kohl is making it clear at every turn that his government backs the NATO plan. But the question is, who do the German people back? Gorbachev, the Russian, is a hero to the Germans. His popularity has soared to the point where it's the envy of German politicians. And that gives him a credibility here that even George Bush can't match. In the most recent poll, Germans were asked who they most trust. 90% said Gorbachev, far higher than either Mr. Bush or Kohl.
Oh, people have the feeling that he has changed the Soviet Union. He is going to make peaceful moves toward the West, and that disarmament may work for the first time.
The Soviet public relations machine hit a new high over the weekend. Foreign policy spokesman Gennady Gerasimov showed up on a game show. Given a prime-time platform, Gerasimov didn't miss a beat. We should swap jokes, he said, not missiles. Gerasimov bet that two muscular men could hold up a bridge for a marching band. He won. The Soviets are betting, too, that Gorbachev's diplomacy is working, that he is convincing Germany its interest may lie closer to its new friends in Moscow than its old ally in Washington. Terry Peterson, CBS News, Bonn.
Military officials of the United States and the Soviet Union signed an agreement in Moscow today designed to reduce the chance of accidental war. It's supposed to improve communications between military units of the two sides so that they can identify themselves in case they stray into each other's territory.
Von Generation zu Generation ernährte es Großeltern, Eltern und Kindeskinder. Ein Frühstück, das Europäer jahrhundertelang genossen haben. In Amerika erkennt man es als Kellogg's Müslix. 5 Getreidesorten oder Kleie. Kellogg's Müslix. Ein Frühstück, wie es sein sollte.
Pain. Pain that throbs. Aches. Pain that pulses. Remember, there is a wonder drug for pain like this. The wonder drug doctors themselves take more often for pain. The wonder drug doctors take more than extra strength Tylenol, more than Advil. More doctors take Bayer for pain. Bayer is the wonder drug that works wonders.
Got nice minty taste to it.
That's good.
Can you say that about your liquid antacid? If not, taste Tums Liquid.
It has a nice taste to it. It's delicious. Tums tastes the best.
Tums Liquid. It works, and it really tastes good. Come on, sport.
We interrupt this vacation.
Charge it.
To remind you the Discover card pays you cash back for every charge.
Smile.
It pays to Discover.
President Bush today talked up his long-promised proposals for cleaning the air and getting acid out of the rain. White House correspondent Wyatt Andrews reports on what Mr. Bush's environmental proposals would and wouldn't do and what they could cost you.
President Bush proposed a sweeping and expensive new Clean Air Act that the White House said could cost up to $19 billion to implement. It's the long-awaited answer to his promise to be the environmental president.
Every American expects and deserves to breathe clean air. And as president, it is my mission to guarantee it.
The president's toughest proposal would cut acid rain pollution in half, a costly decision that could raise electric bills nationwide 2% a year. Electric companies that burn coal will have to cut 10 million tons of sulfur dioxide from their emissions by the year 2000. But the utilities will be allowed to trade or sell their allotments of pollution as long as overall targets are met.
We're allowing utilities to trade credits among themselves for reductions they make, to let them decide how to bring aggregate emissions down as cost effectively as possible.
Despite suspicions about selling pollution credits, the overall acid rain program won praise from environmentalists.
He's broken the logjam on acid rain, and that's very, very good news.
The reviews were not as good on the president's plan to reduce smog. Mr. Bush picked the nation's 9 worst smog areas and called on U.S. automakers to sell 1 million cars capable of burning alternate fuels like ethanol by the year 1997. He also wants Detroit to reduce tailpipe emissions by 40%, a demand some say is not enough. The new plan to reduce cancer-causing gases environmentalists called the weakest part of all. Despite a demand that industry should use the best technology available to cut toxic fumes, it's left to the EPA to write the rules on what that means.
The history of the Clean Air Act demonstrates clearly that merely setting forth goals is not sufficient to achieve them.
The president did get credit today for breaking with the policies of Ronald Reagan. Even those critical of today's details said they're delighted to have the president's ear at all. Wyatt Andrews, CBS News, the White House.
Instead of the usual hail to the chief, it was happy birthday to the chief as President Bush left the White House today to head out west. To help Mr. Bush celebrate his 65th birthday, some guerrilla theater. A White House report that it was Budget Director Richard Darman inside the gorilla suit could not be immediately confirmed.
If you thought you had to give up...
hit Southern California today. There were no immediate reports of serious injuries or damage. The first shock registered 4.5 on the Richter scale, the second 4.3, enough to cause moderate damage. David Dow was on the scene.
Everybody stay calm.
In downtown Los Angeles, the earth moved and government shook to a stop today as spectators fled a county supervisors meeting and many workers in the area took to the streets.
It shook real hard.
Everybody was terrified. Oh, is this the big one, or what's going to happen next? You know.
The brief, moderate quake and a sharp aftershock 30 minutes later dealt most of their damage to the nerves. The tremors were centered a few miles from the October 1987 earthquake, which left 8 dead and hundreds of millions of dollars in damages, where memories are still raw.
Of course, you get scared because of what happened the last time.
I felt scared. I felt a terrible something in the heart and everything.
The quakes seemed to fit a pattern.
Both of those are part of a general increase in Los Angeles basin earthquake activity that's been going on since '86.
But does this doubling in minor and moderate quakes mean that a so-called big one is any more likely? Today, as the shaking subsided, scientists did not have an answer. David Dow, CBS News, Los Angeles.
The Agriculture Department today estimated the 1989 winter wheat crop will be the lowest in 11 years. The report said the crop will be 1.41 billion bushels, down 10% from last year's harvest. The lingering drought and freezes late in the season cut sharply into the winter wheat crop in parts of the Great Plains. The ethics warfare sensitivities in Washington. House Ethics Committee Chairman Julian Dixon filed an amended financial disclosure form today. The change to show that $100,000 his wife earned last year in companies operating duty-free airport shops was based on an investment of less than $15,000. Los Angeles airport officials are currently looking into whether those companies meet standards to qualify as minority contractors. A new dimension tonight to the still unfolding investigation of where millions of federal housing and urban development dollars went. Congress is already investigating how some well-connected Republicans and former Ronald Reagan appointees made big money off the program in what are called consulting fees. Terrence Smith reports questions are being raised now about millions of HUD dollars that may have gone to the poor and homeless. Trouble is, even if they did, HUD never approved it.
It's not a typical Washington scandal. Marilyn Harrell admits she's been siphoning money from the Department of Housing and Urban Development, more than $5 million over the last 3 years, but she says she's been giving it to the poor. She's already been dubbed Robin Hood.
More and more people began coming asking for help, and I gave it to them.
You couldn't say no.
I couldn't say no.
Marilyn is part of what prosecutors say is a nationwide pattern of HUD contractors embezzling millions of dollars that the agency should receive from the sale of foreclosed homes.
Marilyn's embezzlement scheme began in 1985 when she admits that she took $37,000 in HUD funds to cover a shortfall in her title business. HUD never noticed, so she says she continued siphoning money to help the homeless and indigent.
I just figured, well, if I'm going to go, at least I can help a few people up before I go down.
One of those she helped was Charlotte Chapatis, who runs a shelter for the homeless in Baltimore, from a house purchased with embezzled HUD funds.
It is through her that the place is kept going to help multitudes, dear.
But outraged members of Congress see the case as just one more example of slipshod administration at the huge housing agency.
HUD management's been for the dogs for a long time. Every time you turn over a new rock at HUD, you see more worms and slime underneath.
Marilyn Harrell admits that some of the money she skimmed from HUD may have been commingled with her own funds to pay for a mink coat for her mother and the swimming pool behind her house.
So I couldn't answer that, no. I would have to say there's a possibility.
Federal prosecutors say they intend to indict Marilyn, but so far no charges have been lodged. Meanwhile, Marilyn is spending her spare time lecturing at a local community college. Her subject, creative finance. Terrence Smith, CBS News, Washington.
And that's the CBS Evening News. Dan Rather. See you tomorrow. Good night.
I'm Harry Smith. Tomorrow, Jim Lampley with the winner of the Leonard Hearns Championship fight. Also, John Lithgow with a brand new TV movie tomorrow on CBS This Morning.
This is CBS.
Everywhere I go, people ask me about the Mazda Challenge.